Before we get to today's episode, I wanted to let you know that the Bible study we've been walking through in this series, The Passion, is now available, fully revised and updated. Between now and the end of November, you can get $5 off a leader's guide, whether print or download, with the code POD5. You can find the study, along with all the episodes in this series, at seeJesus.net/passion. Hello, and welcome to Seeing Jesus with Paul Miller. I'm Liz Vobril, and I'm here with my colleague Robert Rowe, who is our student ministries director at seeJesus. And this ministry, seeJesus, creates discipleship tools and trains people in how to use them. Many organizations do important work helping the church be the hands and feet of Jesus, but seeJesus works on the imagination and the heart. We want to help the church rediscover the beauty of Jesus and catch a vision to live as he lived. So we have been in this series on the passion of Jesus, really looking at this last part of his life as everything is kind of bumped up a notch. And we've been watching in particular some of his emotions, and we've been in sadness the last few episodes. We're going to continue and look at one more glimpse at where we see Jesus's sadness as he nears the end of his life here.
Yes, and this incident we get from John, who often gives us very detailed descriptions of situations that the other gospel writers haven't included. So thank God for the Gospel of John. And let me explain Judas's and the emotion we're looking at is sadness, and we're going to be looking at Jesus' reaction to the Judas's betrayal of him. And again, typically we tend to kind of go stoic and think, oh, he just did it. You know what I mean? But so anyway, first of all, just a couple context things. One is that the Pharisees couldn't get their hands on Jesus, and Matthew and John all mention the kind of the problem that they had was that during the daytime, huge crowds were following him. These are devoted followers, and they would have a riot if they tried to arrest him. And that's what Matthew 26, 4-5 says. They plotted to arrest Jesus in some sly way and kill him, but not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. And late afternoon, evening, Jesus slipped away, and John tells us that at the end of chapter 8. Jesus is quoting John 8:59. Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. So the only way they could get to know Jesus, they had to get Jesus at night. But to get to Jesus at night, they had to break into the 12. Because they were the only ones who knew where Jesus was. And so when Judas comes to them, and Edersheim's treatment of Judas, I wish I could get into it, is absolutely brilliant. And I do have a love course on Judas that is well worth listening to. It's a free listen on our website if you go on.
We can link to that particular one in the show notes.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. And so let's just go to the Passover. And it's interesting. We don't know a lot about Judas. All that we do know that every incident he takes action. He's an organizer, which means he's a kind of a leader. It's striking to see that leadership in him. And he always does something. Even his suicide, he's taking action. You know, he's got a problem, his shame. The only way he can deal with it is to destroy himself. His shame and his guilt. It's a scary reminder at the time when I was first reading it, still is like, just be careful. It's okay to wait. It's okay to, it's okay just to wait on God, even during really hard, confusing times. It's not just okay to wait, but it's probably really wise to wait.
Paul, are you getting at that? Are you getting a kind of almost like a contrast between Judas and Peter? Judas was not willing to wait. Peter was.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. Jesus does tell Peter, that Satan has sought to sift you, but I have prayed for you that your faith won't fail. And so Judas's faith failed. Like faith, it was he had let, his faith had been too much Judas centered and too much of that Messiah king centered. So it probably, Edersheim speculates, we don't know for sure, that it was Jesus, when Judas, probably very bright person, let's assume, began to see the outlines that Jesus was going to be killed and become disappointed in Jesus, that Jesus was not going to be the kind of king he wanted. And then the trigger event is, and we get it from Mark. Actually, it's in all the Gospels, I think, because John mentions it too. But Jesus rebukes Judas at the. This is before the Last Supper, of course, when they're at Lazarus's house. So this is Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. That trio, when they're at his house on Saturday night, when Mary anoints his feet with perfume, which is different than the Luke 7 woman. When Mary anoints his feet with perfume, and Judas, and it looks like several other disciples along with Judas complain about the waste of $25,000, $30,000 when she pours out probably her dowry. Judas leaves the gathering after Jesus rebuked to go betray Jesus. Like it's the straw that broke his, like, not only is he a no good Messiah, but he's rebuking me. And, he's just angry at Jesus. He's angry in the moment, and just talk about bad emotions. And so then at the Last Supper, so that would be, so the decision to betray happens Saturday. So now we go forward to Thursday night, and I'll try not to go off on a too tangent, but there's pretty strong evidence that the Last Supper was Wednesday night. N.T. Wright has a really good essay on that in his, I think it's his book on Jesus, called The Son of God. Jesus, Son of God. He has a big section of a chapter on a study that really makes sense that was Wednesday night, and that Jesus' death was actually Thursday night. But I don't want to confuse you, or we don't know.
Throw off our calendars.
Yeah, throw off our calendars. Get all of Christianity upset.
Now different.
The Gospel of John is it's from John that this comes, because John, having written his gospel, finally is concerned to correct an impression that people have picked up in the church that Jesus died Friday night. And he goes out of his way to say that it was the preparation day. But anyway, whatever. So we're Wednesday or Thursday night at the Last Supper, and there is a fight, we know, an argument between the disciples at the Last Supper. And Luke tells us that, and Jesus tells them that they need to be servants of one another. If they want to be great among you, they need to be servants. And then John tells us this scene. John describes the seating position and the way, here's how, at the Last Supper, that actually makes sense that Jesus' foot washing is a response to the disciples' fight. Jesus announces, and I think it's partly to prepare his disciples. He says to them, I am not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen, but this is to fulfill the scripture. He who shares my bread has lifted up his heel against me. He's talking about Judas. I'm telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am he. And then Liz, read from verse 21 on.
After he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. His disciples stared at one another. at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, son of Simon. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. "What you are about to do quickly," Jesus told him. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the feast or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night.
It is the very sweet description from John is verse 21, when Jesus first talks about Judas, then he feels it. And it's kind of how our emotions work. They're kind of like our heart stock price. Our spirit goes up and down. Our mind is our rational capacity. Our soul is the core of who we are, but our spirit goes up and down. So Jesus, using his mind, describes what's going to happen. And then his spirit, and it's not like his spirit is disengaged in that, but he feels what he just said. And it like emotions are the tail of the heart. Or you could say they're the overflow of the heart. And so Jesus is right next to John, and Jesus doesn't say he's troubled in spirit. He does that in another passage that we'll look at in our next one. But Jesus, but after he said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit. So it just, like you were saying, Robert, in our last thing, it was all over. Like, how do you know someone is troubled? He was agitated. And that's actually, I wish they would have the word agitated there, because that's what Jesus was feeling. Like when someone is agitated, they're tense, they're restless, they fidget.
Yeah. And John sitting right next to him, could sense that. I would say even leaning up against him, he probably felt, he felt the tenseness in Jesus' body. He saw it on his face.
The breathing is different. Yeah. So so Jesus is agitated in spirit. In other words, this is, the troubling sounds too King Jamesy. It sounds too.
It's a little floaty.
Yeah, it's a little floaty.
Troubled's just a little floaty.
Yeah, it's just kind of disengaged. Agitated really kind of captures it better.
Yeah.
But it's in spirit. It doesn't come out. One of the rules of the modern life is if you feel something, you should express it. And a lot of times emotions should be under control. And not always. I mean, because you've got Jesus' emotion of anger in the temple and him making a whip. It's an outward expression of his emotions. But it's lovely, because how do we usually think when we're agitated? How do we usually feel about ourselves?
Yeah, well, it's you're bringing up the importance of wisdom being attached to emotions, right? It does take wisdom to realize, to feel emotions coming on and then determine, is this a proper emotion? Is this not a proper?
Right.
Should I let this emotion out? Should I hold this emotion in? And not that we become cognitive like machines in that sense, but wisdom is never void of the understanding we bring to our emotional state.
Right. That's right. Liz?
Well, and Paul, when you were saying, how do we usually feel when we're agitated? I guess I was thinking, there's a way of thinking about being agitated that's like, well, if I had faith, if I was praying, I need to pray more about this so I won't be agitated, right? That it's sort of the like the life of faithfulness would mean you're not agitated ever, because you're always 100% sure you're in the midst of God's will and it's totally fine, whatever it is that's happening. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And therefore so we have there's been a tendency, I think this is changing within the evangelical church, to suppress the emotions in the name of having faith. Like faith should be constant in joy. In Philippians 4, people use that. There is no question that the Christian life is a generally joyful life, but there are, like Paul, just in the chapter before in Philippians 3, talks about how despairing he was when Epaphroditus was sick, and how concerned he was. And he talked about God spared him from grief upon grief. Like he already had one grief, he didn't want another grief on top of it. So, but it's kind of a Bible verse Christianity, where you take a Bible verse and kind of plaster that on the Christian without looking at what is it to be human.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Our view of sanctification is very narrow. Like transform the cognitive mind and everything else will follow. And we forget, like, the Spirit is transforming every part of my being. The Spirit is sanctifying my emotions as much as he is sanctifying my mind. So there is this holistic approach to sanctification that is really beauty formation to become fully human again. And so I think we've narrowed it so much that if we just say the right words or think the right thoughts, that there's going to be a magical transformation that occurs in every area of life. And that's just not. The Spirit is way more uncontrollable, untamable than just that.
I guess I'm thinking too, Robert, as you say that, sometimes we make it seem as though to be sanctified would be to only have good emotions, right? Like if you were fully sanctified, you would only have peace and contentment and joy, because you wouldn't have agitation or anxiety or anger. Maybe it's all the A emotions would have to be eliminated. But, whereas I think, Paul, what we see in Jesus being agitated is like, this is an uncomfortable situation. It's not particularly happy. I mean, Jesus trusts his Father, but it doesn't mean that he's like, mind over matter here, feeling nothing about the betrayal, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different applications of this, but I think of the young mom who's with say 3 little kids at home, and at 4:30, like, and 5:00 or 6:00,
agitation central. Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, those, kind of from 4 to 7 are mommy pressure hours. Mm-hmm. So and where your kids are not particularly thoughtful about you, they're hungry, tired, demanding, cranky, fighting. And so as a mother, you're feeling that'll make you agitated. And the tendency is to think that I'm sinful, that somehow I'm sinning, that I'm, that if I had more faith, I would be agitated. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But here, but Jesus here is experiencing the loss of Judas and the evil of the betrayal of a close friend. He's concerned about, if I were the leader of a group, if there was a key member of our leadership team that betrayed me, that would send shockwaves through the organization. And something's really they're going to go through a really hard season. So Jesus is caring for them in what he says. And when he says it, he feels that loss. He feels the loss of Judas. I mean, he's been there. What scenes do you see that? Like in the Fellowship of the Ring, if you've seen that, when at the end of book 1 or the movie 1, when the fellowship breaks up, That's a hard event.
Yep.
When a family breaks up, when someone dies, it's a hard event. And it just, Jesus has kind of given us a template to be ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that yourself is right, but it is a beautiful picture of normal. Like I have one older friend that will often get depressed, and sometimes the reason for her feeling depressed are her circumstances are depressing, and I just encourage her, but it's okay to be depressed.
Yeah.
Because your life is depressing.
Right.
And because of these 6 things.
That might not be especially encouraging.
Yeah. Well, you know me, Liz. I just go right for it.
Your life is depressing.
Yeah. So it's actually an encouragement.
Yes.
So because what Christians are dealing with is guilt on top of depression.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's like Jesus is like, it's okay for losses to hurt. Like it's not, I think even that is, I was talking to a friend after church the other day who's going through something where she has to like change her diet really radically from like enjoying food to just eating a few simple things that are not bothering her body right now. And I was like, I feel like you're grieving a loss, right? And it's okay. It's not that if you were more spiritual, you'd be like, well, gee, at least I can still eat and I'm alive, so I ought to be grateful. But there's a loss there that there's also seeing Jesus have feelings says it's not that if we were mature Christians, those things wouldn't bother us.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's got me thinking, I'm just really, really like, this is a Robert commercial, but like, I'm really grateful for what for just being part of seeJesus and the joy of what we get to do to just get people to slow down in their studying of the Gospels and their studying of Scripture. Because I think for so many years, I would say for 40 of my years as a follower of Jesus, when I read that Jesus was troubled in spirit, 100% of the reason he was troubled in spirit is because he's getting ready to go to the cross. And it had nothing to do with losing Judas. And I think when you slow down in the passage, yes, I'm sure there's pieces of this that he's troubled about what is looming in the near future in 24 hours. But at the heart of Jesus and his love, just knowing him as a person now, his troubling is that one of his good friends is going to be lost and lost to destruction. And I just love what we're encouraging people to do is just slow down, like quit rushing your relationship with Jesus, quit rushing your devotional time. Just spend a week, spend a month in one passage and just unearth the whole thing. So that's my commercial. Sorry, all
right. Good.
I was
good.
That troubled aspect of Jesus. It really gives you a window into his heart.
Mm-hmm.
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 Yeah.
The other thing when we go slow through that passage that I was enjoying when I read it is just the Simon Peter motioning to this disciple, being John the writer, and then John like leaning back, like it's very embodied, right? Even this interaction between them is like body language among friends. Which
I
again,
wish everyone could have just seen the sign that you made on the podcast for what Peter was signing to, like a surfer sign or something.
Yes, but it's like very, that's very human, the way even they are relating as two friends close to Jesus, trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, that's a cool thought.
Yeah, it's a very intimate picture.
Mm-hmm.
Let me do a closing commercial. And the reason we have missed these things on sadness is because of, and I've said this before, so please bear with me, is the impact of Greek Stoicism on the early church. And there's so Greek Stoicism was very much influenced by Neoplatonism, and it's very much like Buddhism, and it comes in through the word stoic, which is you tough it out. Because emotions get us into trouble. It's a suppressing of the emotions because you're trying to get above human life. And so what it ends up doing is depersonalizing it. It depersonalizes scripture because it strips it of emotions, it strips it of meaning. And that's when we lost the lament tradition in the church. We had it in the Bible, but it stopped being part of our communities. And you see that all the way through. There's a book. What's it? Hang on here.
There's a great book by an Australian guy on the emotions of Jesus in the Gospels. Peter, I can't remember his last name, but super good.
There was an Oxford University Press book, The Reformation of Suffering by Ronald Ritkers. He's a Lutheran. So it studies late medieval piety and then early Protestant piety, particularly in Germany. And he just has this one-off comment. He actually has a little bit of a dialogue on it. And and his comment so this is a little snapshot in medieval and early Reformation in the early Protestant era. He says, what's missing from pastoral theology and practice at that time is the lament. And he says, modern scholars have suggested that the early Christian theologians were unduly shaped by ancient pagan philosophy, especially Stoicism, and thus lost sight of the Hebrew theology and the very human way it could conceive of God's relationship with his covenant people. So one German Lutheran scholar, Oswald Bayer, said, since the earliest days of Christianity, expressions of lament in worship have largely withered. Because of the influence of Stoic thought, lament was pushed out of the everyday lives of Christians, where it does appear, it does so without form. Even theological reflection has largely ignored it. While the elements of lament did not entirely disappear, the fundamental significance of lament has not been accounted for in the church's liturgy or in its theology. And you see lament in Paul. Like, let me put it this way. When Paul says something sad, he feels that sadness. Like he's not separated emotionally from it. So Paul in Romans 9, when he feels the loss of Israel, when right before that big chapters 9 and 10 on predestination, Paul feels it. Like it like when you teach and study the doctrine of predestination, you should weep over the loss of that. Like you don't teach these things without weeping. Or you don't. And the other thing you see Paul do is he starts worshiping, and it's all through his writing. Like all of a sudden, Paul is just worshiping. And you see that in Romans 11 at the end, where he's just marveling at the plan of God that he's been tracing for 10 chapters. I'm not going to quote it right, but it starts out with, the wisdom and, and so we need to, so Paul is reflecting that ancient Jewish pattern of being fully human that comes to such an expression in Christ.
Makes me think, Paul, your mention of worship, the worship side of that too, is like, maybe there are ways we may be more in tune with how the church has resisted the sadness side of things. But no doubt it also gives us a narrower bandwidth for the joy worship side of things, right? Like that if we keep our emotions to a more narrow band, we're probably cutting out both ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you all for listening today. As we wrap up this episode, just one last reminder that this study we've been talking through is available. This month, you can get $5 off your copy if you use the code POD5. The study, as well as the show notes and audio for all the episodes in this series, is available at seeJesus.net/passion. We'll be back in another couple of weeks with another episode. And thank you again for listening and being part of Seeing Jesus with Paul Miller.